Hey everyone, welcome to Cyberspeak. Today I'm joined by Herman Brown, who is the Chief Information Officer at the San Francisco's District Attorney's Office. Herman is a seasoned leader in technology and cybersecurity, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with him today. So, Herman, let's start with a quick introduction. Can you tell us about your current and past roles?
So, I'll start off. I'm Herman Brown. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. I also wear the hat of DSO, so the Department Security Officer as well. I work in conjunction with the city CISO in ensuring the security of the environment, not just from a city perspective, but from specifically the District Attorney's Office perspective. I've been in this role for 9 years. Prior to that, I worked for the city of San Francisco in the central IT department. And prior to that, I was a VP director of technology for an ad agency, IT manager for a software development company. I worked as consulting in the healthcare sector for a company called SAIC, Science Application International Corporation. And I worked for a small service center prior to that. And then I was active duty military for 7 years. And that's really where my career started.
What did you want to become in high school, and what did you end up studying in college?
When I graduated from high school, I actually wanted to be an architect, but going into the military, they did not have an architect field. So I chose computers. So my rate was a data processor. So I worked on mainframe systems. And while I was in the military, they trained me and sent me to some schools, some technical schools. But then I also was going to community college, working on my degree in architectural drafting and design. And then I was just about to get out of the military, and uh, I'm 2 years into my bachelor's degree. And I was talking with the professor, Professor Green, and he asked, what is it that you do in the military? And I was, oh, computers technology. And he was like, why do you want to be an architect? He's like, you've been in my architecture 101 class. What does it take to be an architect? And I was like, it's a 5-year program. And you have to, work as an apprentice for 3 years before you can set the exam. It's a 17 or it's a 33 and a half hour exam. It's offered once a year and it has a 17% pass rate. So it's harder to pass the architect's exam than it is to pass the bar to become an attorney. And he says, okay, so apparently you were listening and paying attention in my class. And it's amazing that all these years later, I still remember those statistics. And that just shows what a profound impact he had on my life and the decisions that I made.
Yeah.
So he says, look at me. I'm 65 years old. I'm supplementing my architect career by teaching. He said, now, and don't get me wrong. He says, I'm making decent money, and it's not that I'm in the poorhouse, but just that most architects don't make money until after they're passed away, and or um if you want to do commercial architect and do like skyscrapers and tall building, then there's a definitely an opportunity to make money there in that aspect. But think about it this way: when you get out of the military, well, how much longer you said you have? And I was like, well, it's just a couple of months. He says, okay. So when you get out of the military and you go apply for a job as an architect, apprentice, how much money do you think you're going to make? And I was like, well, it's somewhere between $6 and $12 an hour, right? I said, if it's a small firm, more likely $6. If it's a larger firm, $12. And he's like, okay. So once again, you have been paying attention. And he says, okay, now how much money do you think you're going to make if you were to get out with, well, you said 7 years, right? And I said, yeah, 7 years of military training and technology, school. And I said, somewhere between 35 and $45 an hour. And he says, and you want to be an architect? Why? Six to 12, 35 to $45. He said, so this is what I would do. He said, is I would change my major to computer science, finish in 4 years. And if you truly still want to become an architect, go back and get your master's in architecture. And then that way you don't have to set for the exam. You don't have to be or excuse me, you don't have to be an apprentice. You can just set for the exam upon graduation. And then you can still become an architect. And so I said, wow, okay. And so that's what I ended up doing. So I changed my major to computer science, got out of the military, and that's what I said. I went and worked for a small local firm, and then eventually just really worked my way up.
So, as you leveled up in your career, what did the growth feel like? And what are some of the learning initiatives you took on your own?
Whenever I do public speakings, I kind of joke and tell people that um, I'm like the Drake song, started at the bottom and now I'm at the top because I literally
Yep.
started at the bottom, manually making cables, RJ11s, RJ45s, fiber optic cables, having to polish the tips and hot glue them, running cabling through crawl spaces to doing network engineering to systems administration to mid management to now, senior leadership. And so it was a journey and it's taken me 20 plus years to kind of get there, you know. Um, but during that time, I also observed the people and emulated, the people that in the profession that I wanted to be like, not so much from a personal perspective, but from a professional perspective. And so I worked hard. I studied. I studied on my own. I had one organization who had offered to pay for, my training and for my exams. And when I wanted to do it, they're like, oh, no, we don't have the money to do it, but we had another person that I was working with and they were paying for them to do the courses and whatnot. So I just took the initiative and said, I'm just going to do it on my own. So I went out and bought my own books, did my own studying. Um, because I worked for a computer center, I mean, we had equipment at our disposal. So I was able to build uh, um, a Windows server, and play with it and learn how to set that up. But I did not have any like true mentors, that kind of sat me aside and said, hey, here's how you do this. Let me
Yep.
show you and let me help you through your career path. So it was really me just observing, learning, and having the initiative to want to do it on my own.
What interested you in taking this call, and what are some of your thoughts on leadership communication?
That's what I tell people is that, that's why I do things like this is because I know that there's other people that are coming up the ranks, especially minorities,
Yep.
men and women that, don't have that leadership because there still is not a lot of people like myself that are in these leadership roles. I have been the only person of color in a boardroom, and it's a little scary, intimidating. I should say, since it's scary, but more can be intimidating.
Yep.
You're perceived differently, when you speak versus someone else speaking. You always have to be very careful and mindful of what you say, how you say it, because the perception can be different. I tell a story about, being in a meeting where we were having a debate, very civil, one person had their ideal. I had my position from a technology leader. And so I very firmly and directly stated what my position was and what my thoughts were. The other person got upset and literally slammed their fist on the table and knocked the chair over and stormed out of the room. But yet I was told that I was being aggressive. And I was like, I sat there, in my chair calmly, in a monotone voice, but firm and directly, and stated my position and direction in which I felt from a technology perspective we needed to go. This person was not a technologist. I said, but yet they can slam their fist on the desk and knock the chair over, but yet I'm the aggressive one. And they're like, well, Bob is just passionate. And that's just Bob. So there is a double standard there. And so I tell people, learning how to navigate those types of situations was probably the hardest thing because I tell you, technology is easy,
Yep.
right? The technology piece is the easy piece. It's dealing with people and learning how to deal with people. So the soft skills are the most important skill set that anyone can have in any environment at any level, whether that's an entry level position, mid level position, or senior level position.
What are your thoughts on soft skills when it comes to cybersecurity?
Well, I think professionalism and communication is the most important skill set to have, and especially being in the cybersecurity field where I assume you're aspiring to be a CISO, is that your role and responsibility is going to be less hands-on, and it's going to be more in front of leadership, board members, CEOs, CIOs, CTOs, and having those conversations about the business and the risk and how these programs or policies, governance are important and how it's going to impact the business if you don't do it. So you have to get comfortable, become very comfortable in speaking
Yeah.
to that level of leadership, but at the same time, knowing that your audience is also going to vary, right? You're going to have some of those non-technical people that you'll be speaking to. You're going to have some of those technical people who think they're really technical, but they're not. And then you're going to have the technical people, right? So being able to understand your and know your audience so that you can deliver the message clearly, concisely, um, and with confidence is really important. You know, when you go into a meeting and you're stuttering or you're very kind of timid and shy, then that doesn't vote any confidence, and you're going to have a harder time selling, your product or your solution. And so it's actually ironic that we would have this conversation today because I actually literally just did a presentation yesterday for the Genesis Group, which is a nonprofit that helps underprivileged youth that
Yeah.
are first generation college students. And I actually gave them a presentation on professionalism and communication and why it's important in the workplace. So maybe that's something that we can talk about doing for your group as well, because I think it was very informative um, and important. But, and I talked to them about, having confidence in themselves and building their own personal brand, right? And so your name is your brand. And so you want to be able to speak factually, you want to be able to speak, articulate clearly and concisely, especially when you're talking with senior leadership, CEOs, CFOs, COs. They don't want a long drawn out story and history. And, they want to know what is it that you're trying to do? Why are you trying to do it? How is this going to impact the business? And why is this important to the business? Right. And then what's the cost going to be? What's my return of investment? It's really kind of those five things. And so you want to get in, you want to be able to articulate that, get them to understand that, and then answer any follow-up questions they may have. But like I said, you have to do it with confidence and so forth, or it seems like, you're just guessing and you don't know what you're talking about. And then they're going to be a little bit more apprehensive about going with you and supporting you in that ideal, even though it may be the best thing, right? You sound something as simple as like we need to have a firewall, right? And if you can't
Yeah.
articulate why you need to have that firewall, they're gonna be like, well, okay, well, you're just asking for money.
Yeah.
It doesn't really benefit me, but if you can say, hey, we need this firewall because it's going to protect us from, external adversaries and blah blah blah, then it goes a lot further. But also just building a personal relationship, professional relationship with your colleagues. One of the things that I do is I try to schedule regular meetings with all levels of staff. So, like in the DA's office, I speak to our victim advocates, I speak to the supervisors, I speak to the department heads. Obviously, I'm speaking at the leadership level, but I'm understanding what are your pain points, what are some of the issues that you're facing when in your day-to-day lives, and then from a CIO perspective, I'm coming back to my team and saying, hey, I spoke with this person. I understand they're having this pain point. How can we, come up with solutions to solve these problems? From the CISO standpoint, I'm taking a little bit different approach. And like I went into a meeting with senior leadership at an organization, and we get into the meeting and they wanted to do this thing. And so the vice president, CEO goes to speak and saying, well, Herman, before we get started, I just want you to know we don't care about security, right? We just care about, the business and getting our job done.
Yeah.
I said, understood. And I'm not here to say no as the CISO. I'm not here to say no. Is my job is to, well, first and foremost, is that's why you pay me, is to worry about security, not for you to worry about security. So let's just get that clear. Secondly, is I'm not here to say no. My job is to figure out how do we provide the service that you want and need to be able to do your job, but yet maintaining the integrity of the business, right? So that the brand is not compromised and we not lose money. And so I need to just understand what it is you're trying to do, why you want to do it, and then I can come up with a solution that is amicable, that meets the risk acceptance level of the organization, because every organization has a risk acceptance level, right, of what they're trying to do. Um, and so kind of once we got that out the air and they started talking about, okay, this is what we want to do, this is why we want to do it, blah, blah. I was like, okay, I have some ideals, but I don't want to just blurt them out right now. I want to take it back to the team, think about it a little bit, kind of work through the whole process to think about, whether or not this is going to work and or which solution may work the best and
Yeah.
provide the best outcome and balance of security and operations, right? Because that's also the other part of security is that when you're implementing security, you want to implement security at a level that it secures your environment, but not to the point to where it um, disables the staff, the team, the organization from being able to do their job. So you have to find that right balance of security. Because if it's too secure and
Yeah.
it's too difficult for people to access that application, a system, or whatever it is that they need to do, then all they're going to do is try to find a way to circumvent it. And so you don't want them
Yeah.
circumventing because that could be just even worse than not having anything in place at all. But you also want to make it, as I tell people, is I want to put security in place that it's efficient enough that people know that if they don't follow this process, that they're going outside of the governance and policy and they're doing something incorrect. But yet we can also monitor for that to be able to correct that behavior and discipline that behavior when necessary.
Yeah.
Right. So finding that right balance. Um, yeah, so that's why communication is so important, right? And it is about word choice and choosing your words, choosing the right words, phrasing it correctly. Um, yeah, so like I said, so everyone, understands.
Do you make use of security analogies in your work?
My CFO, when I first, and I said, oh, we need to buy this security tool for, to be able to manage this risk. And he'd be like, well, didn't we just buy this other tool? And I was like, yes, but every tool is not the same.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but you said it was security and it's a our environment, our data is not important and all this kind of stuff. And so I like to come up with analogies. And so one of them being that I was Navy, I say, okay, well, you know what? Think of the organization as a wooden ship. All right. I says, and then you have the water, the line, where the boat sits in the water and the water comes up to a certain area on the boat. That's your water line. I said, now we're going to take a drill and we're going to start drilling holes of various sizes in the boat. Some above the water line, some below the water line, some small holes, some big holes. And I said, and these are your security gaps. So, right.
Yeah.
So this may be your firewall. This is your endpoint protection. This is so forth. I said, and if it's below the water line, if it's a small hole, it's a high risk, but it's still a lower risk than the bigger hole, that's below the line, but not as big of a risk as the big hole that's above the water line where water may splash in, but it doesn't. I said, and so being able to articulate that and kind of explain that to him and say, okay, so now we have this plug that is plugging up this EDR, security hole that we have, but I can't say that, oh, I want to buy, firewall and unplug the EDR plug and plug it into the firewall hole because it's a different size hole potentially, right? It may be a bigger hole, smaller hole, it may be above the water line above, and so it changes the risk. And and explaining that to him, he actually kind of understood a lot better the risk, and when we talk about security tools, why there's different security tools and why we need those tools. And I use post office as an example when we talk about routing. It's like it was taking a piece of mail and yeah, so being able to have those analogies to help break it down so people can understand who want to, because the CFO just happens to be one of those people that he feels like he needs to know he wants to get into the weeds of the details to try to understand what's going on because he's the CFO. I mean CFO. I tease him then and call him CFO because his job is to count the beans and he's
Yeah.
trying to hoard all the beans, so he wants to say no, to any of these projects, but yeah, but that's why communication is important and developing that relationship. So I have a great relationship with the leadership staff and with all the staff at various levels that they also feel that they can come to me and speak to me about whether it's innovation or whether it's about security, and that I'm going to be honest, open, and frank, and that I am there to solve the problem for them.
What are some of your thoughts on the CISO role?
I think historically, CISOs have been the no person. And so organizations have hated the CISOs. I was actually at a dinner the other week with a bunch of CISOs, and the one, CISO was like, "Yeah, my company hates me. No one likes me in that company." And everyone kind of joked and laughed, and he was like, "No, he's like, I'm dead serious. He's like, I am the least liked person in the organization because I'm always saying no." And I told him, I said, "Well, my opinion is you should not be saying no." And what I tell people is, like, with my organization, I have this acronym PACEIT, PACEIT, stands for Pride, Accountability, Communication, Empowerment, Innovation, and Teamwork. And the I in innovation is not that the I in innovation is that we remove the word no from our vocabulary. When the business comes to us with a problem, it's our job to solve the problem. So we come up with solutions on how we can solve the problem. We make recommendations as to which solution we think is the best. And then we put it on the business to say no because the business isn't willing to invest in the resources, time, money, or people.
Yep.
Right. And so if the business isn't willing to invest, it's not that IT didn't want to do it. Yes, we have a solution. We have a way to solve this problem for you. But the business doesn't think that it's something that they are willing to invest in. And so then it removes us from being the no. So people know, hey, we can go to IT. They're going to come up with a solution for us. And then it's up to the business unit. Um, and sometimes I'll partner with them and I'll go in and have those presentations and speak with them to help support them as to why we need to do this to help support their particular mission. And so so yeah, so that's all is that relationship, professionalism, and communication are important.
What were you like 20, 25 years ago?
Oh wow, what was I like back then? I think I was a quieter person. Did not like public speaking.
Yeah.
Which I think is a lot of younger people is you do not like to public speak, but you over time, practice. I want to say practice makes perfect because I don't think that there's any. I look at other people and I think, oh wow, I want to aspire to be a public speaker like them because I think they did a phenomenal job in their presentation. But I think everyone's story is different and their experience is different, and so no one can tell your story better than you can tell your story, right? So with that, it becomes with practice, but it also was that I knew what I wanted and where I wanted to go. And once again, I looked at others and what they were doing and tried to, somewhat emulate that, but yet finding my own identity. I think I've always been kind of a laid back, kind of, I don't want to say nonchalant, but um, very kind of cool minded, and I think part of that comes from being in the military. And as I have been accused of not being um, excited enough. We had an incident once when systems were down, and so I'm on the phone and I'm talking to people. I'm trying to get the systems back up and doing what I need to do. But
Yep.
I'm the same way that we're having this conversation is the same conversation I was kind of having with them. And one of the leadership was like, I don't understand you. How can you be so calm? You need, and I was like, look, this is not a life or death situation. Yes, the systems are down, it's impacting the business, but me getting all flustered and upset and I'm not going to be able to think clearly,
Yep.
right? And so I need to have a clear thought and mindset. So I need to stay calm. I need to understand the situation so that I'm making the right decisions versus, a knee-jerk reaction and making a bad situation worse. So it was something that they had to understand that, yeah, just because I'm not all excited and pulling my hair out and screaming and excited, that it wasn't important. It was just that I have a different level and method of doing with things because my experience of what some of the other things that I have seen throughout my career and experience. Um, so yeah, so I was quiet. I don't know that if I ever really fully inspired or thought about, being a CIO when I first started off because I was thinking,
Yep.
I'm going to be an architect, and I just wanted to draw and design, homes and so forth.
What are some of the sacrifices you had to make in your career to achieve your goals?
Yeah, I think anything worth having is you have to make a sacrifice. I sacrificed when I was younger a lot of partying and hanging out with my friends and doing things. I remember, like being in the military, right? That
Yep.
was a full-time job. and I was going to school part-time. So, and then I had homework, so I was, focused and concentrating on that because truthfully, my initial plan was to go to the military, do 20 years in the military, get my training and education, retire from the military at 37 years old, right? And then be able to start a real career at that point, but yet have my military retirement, in the back pocket.
Yeah.
Um, that was really kind of the plan. But once getting into the military, I realized that I wasn't going to do 20 years in the military, and so my plan changed. And this is another thing that I tell people, I'll digress here really quickly, is that I tell people is always have a plan. I was like, when you jump in the car and you're not knowing where you're going and you plug it into the navigation, right? It's giving you your destination. I said, that's like life, right? It's like if you're aspiring to be a CISO, you plug in, I want to be a CISO, right? And you have the roadmap of how to get to being a CISO. But as you go through that journey, things come up. You may decide to get married, you get laid off from your job because of the economy. You find that you're working in an organization that's not the right organization for you. And so you change jobs and so forth. So it's never a straight line, right? It's going to curve. But like in the car and the navigation, right? You're driving and you're like, oh, I need to get gas. You jump off the freeway, and the navigation's like, okay, you filled up and let me reroute you to get you back on track. Right. I said,
Yeah.
so that's why it's always important to have that plan. So with that though, is kind of going back to um, the sacrifices that I made was that I didn't go and hang out. And because I was focused on work, I was focused on school and getting an education. And so some of my friends were, upset and they're like, oh man, you don't ever hang out. You need to come hang out. Let's go to the movies. Fast and Furious, 15 just came out. And sometimes I would like, every now and then they'd convince me like, man, you need to take a break. And so I would do it. But then about maybe about 10, 15 years ago, one of the guys I was in the military with, I was having a birthday party
Yeah.
and he came over to the house and he actually was like, hey, if you don't mind, I want to make a speech. I want to toast you. And I said, yeah, sure. And he's a little bit older than I am. And he was like, he said something to the fact that, you know, you were our little big brother. He said, yes, you were younger than us. You were newer to the ship, and we took you underneath our wings to kind of guide you around the ship. He said, but you were the big brother because you were always talking about how you had your plan and what you were going to do and how you were going to achieve it and so forth. And we were just like, look, we're just in the military, just making some money and having fun, and
Yeah.
chasing girls and women and whatnot. And he was like, and so now I look at you where you are and where I am. And he's like, I am so proud of my little big brother and what you've become and what you've accomplished. And so congratulations to you. And um, that was just totally unexpected, for me to hear. But then it also kind of helped me understand and know that I had a profound impact on other people,
Yeah.
and when you're being yourself and you're doing things, you don't necessarily think about who's watching you and that you're a mentor, whether you know it or not, and so yeah, so that also kind of changed my mindset and about how I needed to be and what I needed to project as part of my brand as I started building my brand and understanding that aspect of my life and is I'm in that mid, leadership position, moving up the ranks to get to where I am.
Can you share a mentorship experience with us?
There's the city CISO in a current organization. I actually hired him at the customer service desk, and now he's the city CISO.
Wow.
And we had a call this week, and we were talking, and we keep talking about getting together for lunch, but busy schedules. And every time we talk though, he thanks me and he's like, man, thank you, for hiring me. And he's like, I was watching you and the same thing that I was doing, right? And watching other people. Yeah, he was
Yeah.
watching me and he was like, look, I'm here to where I am because of you, He said, I saw how you were moving and shaking and how you handled and addressed people and how you dealt with people. And he was like, now I see, now I see, right? Because you're where you are and I'm here where I am now. But it's because of you and how you kind of led that way. Once again, not knowing that he was watching and that I was paving this path for others to try to follow my footsteps. But at the same time, I think throughout all of that I've always been genuine to who I am. I genuinely care about other people's success. I truly believe in teamwork. Part of once again, going back to that acronym and teamwork is that, I tell my team the only reason that I'm successful is because they're successful, right? And the only reason that they're successful is because I'm successful, right? And then we as a unit can only be successful as the business is successful. So it's about the partnership, and it's like no one does it alone. And so I don't put myself on a pedestal. Um, there's times that I roll up my sleeves. I've gotten on my hands and knees and taken my suit jacket off, and gotten on my hands and knees and I've crawled underneath the desk to pass a cable to the engineer or desktop person or whatever. And I'm carrying monitors. I'm breaking down workstations because I tell them failure to me is not an option. It's all about success and succeeding. And we all fail together or we all succeed together, right? And so rolling up my sleeves and getting dirty, I think that goes a long ways with leading a team because they're then leading by example and they see that, hey, if he can do it, and that's why I tell the team too, no one on this team is above doing anything. Just because you're a network engineer versus a trial support person, if the job needs to get done and we need hands to do it, I expect you to do it because if I can do it, there's no excuse for anyone else not to be able to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, so leading by example, but I think that was also kind of that innate military training and teamwork and fostering that, which I also say is that we don't necessarily have to like one another, but we just need to be able to work together to solve a common mission and goal.
How did you develop such a robust mindset? Did you read any books early in your career, or was it something else?
I don't know that I think a little bit of it was just luck, being in the right place at the right time, making kind of the right decisions. Um, yeah, there was, yeah, I didn't read any particular books at that point in time. I think it was really about wanting to treat people the way that I wanted to be treated, right? Looking at my managers, whether it was in the military or outside the military, what was a positive thing, what was a negative thing that they did that I didn't like, that I thought, if I ever got into that leadership position or had that, is that's not the way that I would treat people, and so I think just that was what kind of helped mold me into being the leader that I am is, I think people want to be respected. People want uh, to be empowered, to make decisions and choices. As I tell you, like we're all adults, we're all professionals. We all know our jobs and our responsibilities. And so I treat the team that way. But there's the accountability piece, right? Going back to the pace it, right? But I am also going to hold you accountable to those decisions and things that you do. And it doesn't always have to be negative. As I tell them, like, look, if you make a decision and it ends up being the wrong decision, is we sit down, we talk about it either one-on-one or even as a group and understand why that was the wrong decision. Because who knows, at that point in time, based upon the information that you had in front of you, that could have been the right decision. A, a wrong decision isn't always a wrong decision from day one, right? The day one could have been the right decision, but over time it ended up being the wrong decision. I said, so we want to sit down and we try to understand that and then not repeat that. So if you make an honest mistake, you take accountability for it, raise your hand. Yeah, I made the mistake. This is what happened. We learn from it, we move on, and then um, and we forget about it. Now, if you make a stupid mistake, and that and I use this as an example, right? You go into the server room in a data center and you push the big red button at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and shut down the entire network, then that's a different level of conversation and accountability we're going to have,
Yeah.
but I think it was just really wanting to treat people the way that I wanted to be treated and being respectful to one another. And I'm very big on respect, giving respect, and also receiving respect. I know coming into this particular role, um, there was, I think, a lack of respect for IT and the support team overall. I shouldn't say I think there was.
Yep.
And I had a attorney come into my office who wanted to move. And I was like, okay, I understand you want to move. However, the process is that it needs to come from the managing attorney uh, that you can move one and two, where to move you to. And so until I have that conversation with them, I can't move you anywhere. And long story short, they got upset. They raised their voice, yelled and screamed. They walked out of my office and slammed the door. And at that point, at no point did I tell them no. I just said, I just need to have, the right permissions. So, when that happened, though, my team kind of came to my office and they're like, oh, yeah, she's a problem person. One day I was walking down the hallway and she told me to get the F over here, and I
Oh,
was like, what? I'm like, no, 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 no. This stops today, and so I went and spoke with HR and with, the CFO who I reported to. And I was like, look, my team are adults and they're professionals, right? We made a conscious decision at some point in time in our lives to be technologists. Doesn't mean we don't have the aptitude to be attorneys. It just means that we made a different career choice. And just because they're attorneys, they're no better than we are. They're not any better. They're not smarter. They're just a different career path.
yep.
And their response was like, well, they're under a lot of stress, they have to be in court. And I was like, hold on. Everyone is under stress. Do you not think that my team is under stress? There's 400 people across 4 physical locations, and there's 6 of them trying to support those 400 people. You don't think that that's stressful? Because everyone's issue is a priority to that person, right? And so we're trying to prioritize that based upon what we believe is the actual priority, right? I said, so everyone is under stress, so just because you're stressed, that doesn't give you the right to take your frustrations out on my team. Someone yelling at me, look, I've been in the military, I've been in boot camp, I've been yelled at before. I can
Yeah.
take it, right? I said, but I will not tolerate it, my team being, disregarded and disrespected that way so I said, or else it's going to be hard for people to get support. And the response was, what? So you're going to tell your team not to work? I was like, tell you what, when you put in a ticket, do you know where your ticket is in the queue? No, you don't. I said, so your ticket will always be on the bottom of the queue, because who's going to want to come work with you if you're
Yep.
going to, disrespect them and treat them, like they're less than? And with that, that changed the culture of the organization to like, hey, we need to actually take care of these people, because without these people, we really wouldn't be able to do our jobs because we depend on them.
Yep.
One, two, for the team, it was like, hold on, we have a leader, somebody who's going to stand up for us, who's going to support us, and who's going to fight for us. So then that built trust and loyalty, and I'm at a point now in career, like just last year, I was doing reviews, and half my team was like, the only reason I'm here is because you're here. If you leave, I want you to take me with you, or I'm leaving, you know.
Yeah.
And I asked, and I asked them, as a manager, what is it that I can do to help you? Which I'm per the training, leadership training, I'm not supposed to ask that question because it's not supposed to be about me. But
Yep.
I say, well, it's not about me. It's about the person. I'm trying to figure out what can I do more to help them be successful, right? I said, so it's a self-reflection for me, but it's also a way for me to understand, how do I help them? And if I don't ask that question, then how I know how to help them? And they've told me that, no, you're doing everything, you support us, you give us the ability to try new things, you've empowered us to make decisions, so no, so so that's, once again, that's heartfelt and satisfying to know that I have a loyal team that trusts me to support them and make the right decisions and protect them, from the business as best as possible.
How did you become an eloquent speaker?
Yeah, well, it comes with years of experience, and when you get those years of experience, you come up with stories, and there's some
Yep.
stories I could tell you that about experiences and just different people that I've dealt with, but I've always tried to take that experience, whether positive or negative, and take the positive out of it and use it as a learning opportunity.
What are your thoughts on storytelling when it comes to cybersecurity?
Yeah, storytelling is different than presenting, but not so much so. I think some of the best presenters are great storytellers,
Yep.
right? Because in telling the story, it's easier to remember those nuggets and points versus just reading a PowerPoint deck and just kind of going through the slides. Um, but telling the story also makes it relatable, right? Especially if you're genuine and it's your own experience. And that's what, a lot of people have told me that I have this genuine personality and um, that they don't see any fakeness. And I said, well, because it's true. I mean, I'm not trying to brag, and like, yeah, but here we go. I can't be anyone other than me, right?
Yep.
And when I'm talking about my experiences, those are my experiences, and those experiences are genuine to me and who I am. So I guess there's no other way for me to come off than to being genuine and being, that way. And I'm pretty honest and open about, everything that I've experienced and happened in my life. I don't try to sugarcoat or hide anything. Yeah, my journey wasn't a perfect journey. It wasn't always up. There were definitely some down times. There's definitely some difficult managers that I had to deal with throughout my career, difficult people that I had to deal with, and I had to learn how to navigate and circumvent, those situations and issues. I have been in HR's office, a few times for different reasons.
Yep.
Um, Never got into trouble behind them, but I've gotten called into the office, right, because of something I said and how I said it, and sometimes I just think, well, we like I'll tell you this really 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 quick story is
Yep.
that I was having a team meeting, it was a project team meeting, and there were some people who really didn't support the project, and so I said something about, hey, you know what, team, life is about choices, right? Is that, no one can make you do anything you don't want to do, right? And like, you don't have to pay taxes, right? You think you have to pay taxes, but you don't have to pay taxes, right? You can choose not to file with the IRS, but you have to be willing to suffer the consequences of not filing taxes, right? You don't have to come to work, right? You can stay home and decide, hey, I'm not going to go to work for a week. I'm not going to call in or whatever. I said, you just have to be willing to suffer those consequences. And I said, it's no different than what I tell my kids. It's like, hey, look, I can't make you go to school. I can drive you to school and drop you off. Yeah, maybe I can drag you into the classroom, but I can't tie you to the seat and make you stay in the class. I
Yep.
can open up the book for you, but I can't make you read and learn that material, right? I said, however, you have to be willing to deal with the consequences of not going to school, of not bringing home good grades, right? Because that's what I can control. So the PlayStation goes away, your cell phone, right? Those are the consequences if you don't do what you're
Yep.
supposed to do, right?
Yep.
And this is what I'm telling this team, right? So then meeting is over, whatever, and then the later that day or the next morning, I get a call and it's like, hey, you need to come into HR. Okay, I go into HR and HR is like, Herman, you can't be threatening to fire people in a meeting. I'm like, what are you
What?
talking about? Well, it was brought to our attention that you had a meeting yesterday with your team and you were threatening to fire people. So I did not threaten to fire a single person. I said, what I told them was life was about choices and that no one had a gun to their head and was forcing them to be here and working on this project and doing this job. And that, yes, there's the door. If you don't want to be here, you have a choice.
Yep.
You just have to be willing to suffer the consequences of those choices. I said, so where in that statement did you hear me say the word fire or that, I'm looking to get rid of you? Aren't yeah, well, and I was like, well, okay, well then tell me, how should I have have said that? What would have been the appropriate way to say that, to tell people that they have choices? Because do they not have choices? Do people have a gun to their head that I don't know about that's forcing them to be here? Because at last I checked, this was a free country. This is free will. People could to choose to work where they wanted to work.
Yep.
And HR was like, well, okay, well, just be careful about how, so like I said, so I've been in HR and having those types of conversations because people have interpreted, my firm in directness. Because I also say, the other thing about me too is be firm and direct, when necessary, so that people understand very clearly and concisely what it is that you're saying.
So, as we wrap up this call, What are some of your final remarks for all these cybersecurity professionals that are still early on in their career and they still have years to go until they reach higher levels like CISO, CIO, or senior leadership?
Yeah, I would think one is don't be afraid to take a chance,
Yeah.
right? Go for it. Um, Realize that you're going to have to sacrifice at some point in time if you want to get to that next level, right? Whether that means that, you're going to have to study more, you're going to have to invest more into your education or something else to get that. But also, accept the challenge of new things. Don't get comfortable in your, don't get stuck in a comfort zone, I'm always trying to push my team to like, I have one person who hates to do public speaking and doesn't want to get up in front of anyone. And that's usually the person that I pick to get up in front of everyone, to present something to the
Yeah.
team internally or, to have that conversation because I tell them is I want them to grow out of their comfort zone and feel uncomfortable because that's the only way that you're going to grow and expand and get to that next level. So step up and accept those challenges. Treat others the way that you want to be treated and being professional and respectful. And then just work on your communication, those soft skills, because the soft skills are the most important skill set to have. So technology, the tech process, but that can all be trained. Not to say that you shouldn't do it, but those are things that you train for because when you go from one organization to another organization, um, the process is going to differ, right? Especially if you're going from a manufacturing to a software development, right? Is their mindset and culture is going to be different. So that technical stuff you'll learn as you move from organization to organization in the process, but the soft skills are always going to apply.
So you just heard how a CIO thinks, communicates, and makes decisions. The gap isn't knowledge, it's practicing soft skills. So if you want to actually build this skill, not just watch it, join Cyberspeak and start practicing. The link is in the description below. I'll see you inside.